Thank you.
Senator Askew.
Thank you, Deputy President. I rise to make a contribution to this debate on the Fair Work Registered Organisation Amendment Administration Bill, although in reality it might be better named the Placing the Ambulance at the Bottom of the Cliff Bill. It is an example of the government acting hastily to try and address a mess largely of its own making. On the 29th of July, the Minister, Senator Watt, became the responsible minister. I wish him well, because he has inherited from his predecessor a portfolio where the balance has completely tilted in favour of the power of the unions. Everyone accepts in this place Labor has had a close link with the union movement, which founded the ALP. As such, it should be in a prime position to strike a balance between employees and employers with a view to productive and long-term stable jobs. However, there's been a monumental failure in one of the most vital sectors in building our country's productivity, the construction sector. Over 1 million Australians are employed in this sector, and many more in industries which rely on and support it. It is a significant driver of our country's economic growth. Allegations of bullying, intimidation, standover tactics, bribery and retribution, and other criminal activities by union officials of the CFMEU's construction division in Victoria have been downright frightening to hear about. So, revelations that construction workers across the state were turning up to their work sites and enduring this type of harassment and abuse, let alone the allegations of criminal misconduct, should be an embarrassment to this Labor government. The media has well reported these allegations over several years. However, now the government has sought to introduce this bill to the Senate because of its persistent failure to take action, because suddenly it realises the Australian public has had enough. It can only be described as a knee-jerk reaction that fails to provide any real repercussions for the CFMEU and deter them from these activities. This bill seeks to deregister the CFMEU and place it under administration for 3 years. It also grants powers to the Fair Work Commission to give them the authority to appoint the administrator and direct the CFMEU to pay for the cost of administration. It is a temporary and weak piece of legislation. But what this temporary bill fails to do is send a strong message to the CFMEU that these types of behaviours are not acceptable, nor does it apply any conditions or penalties to stamp out this behaviour once and for all. It has significant flaws and does not do enough to stamp out the corruption from the CFMEU for good, nor does it compel the union to make any changes at all to the conclusion of the administration period. For example, this temporary bill states the CFMEU will be deregistered for a period of 3 years with absolutely no conditions. That means there is no incentive for the union to make changes, nor do they need to provide any proof or documentation that they have made the changes. It provides a time frame to allow the current leadership of the union to simply wait out their deregistration process before it expires, and they can go straight back to resuming their previous conduct, allegedly engaging in criminal activity, harassing and bullying other workers and misappropriating funds, some of which have been used to grant sizable donations to the Labor Party's election campaigns in the past, and it is evident, donations to the Australian Greens. The union movement was established to support employee rights. It was supposed to be for the worker, and many fine Australians have led unions with that ideal in mind. But that philosophy has been thrown away by the CFMEU, who have resorted to dirty tactics to get what they want. It was only a few months ago the former State Secretary of this union, John Setka, was filibustering and holding important AFL infrastructure upgrades, including the proposed development of Tasmania's Macquarie Point Stadium, to ransom because of a personal stoush he apparently had with the head of the AFL's umpiring department, who was a former Commissioner of the Australian Building and Construction Commission. It is rather extraordinary that an individual, a union official in fact, has so much clout he can threaten to stall important infrastructure upgrades and hold them to ransom because of a professional disagreement. Let us not forget that the construction industry, particularly those who work in the commercial sector, rely on a steady pipeline of work and often transfer from one work site to another, and the actions taken by Mr Setka would have caused significant stress and uncertainty for those workers. Every worker on a construction site has the right to go to work, and be able to do that work in a respectful environment without the fear of thuggery, intimidation and bullying from a union that purports to support employees. This temporary bill does not go far enough to root out the corruption at the heart of the CFMEU and ensure all workers can go to work without fear of harassment, intimidation or retribution for having a different opinion to the union. We all have the right to go to work and not be bullied. In fact, this week is National Action Week Against Bullying. And if the Labor government was serious about drawing a line in the sand against this behaviour, they would consider adopting the coalition amendments as a first step and support the referral of this matter to a Senate inquiry. The CFMEU is a union that has far-reaching arms into the construction and building sector across the country. The Victorian branch, which most of the allocations are centred, also runs the Tasmanian branch of the union. As a senator for Tasmania, that makes me particularly concerned that the behaviours and attitudes of the Victorian CFMEU branch have also filtered down to the Tasmanian branch, which is under its control. There are many honest and hard-working construction workers in Tasmania who may be members of the CFMEU, and I'm heartened that so far there have been no specific allegations against Tasmanian CFMEU members. I believe it is important that a bill like this sends a strong message to all members of this union that this behaviour will not be tolerated by this parliament anywhere across the country. Deputy President, there needs to be an inquiry into this temporary bill because we need to hear from the Department, the Fair Work Commission and other stakeholders about how this proposed legislation will operate if it is enacted. We also need to hear from stakeholders about its effectiveness. Given the seriousness of the allegations, we need to ensure administration of this temporary bill is a transparent and independent process that reports to Parliament regularly and sets clear objectives of how the CFMEU needs to change before it can be taken out of administration. I am sure the families of those who are calling out the criminal behaviour of officials at the CFMEU and those who have experienced the bullying and intimidation, death threats and other behaviour would not feel that this bill goes far enough to ensure the CFMEU truly changes its trajectory. There have been calls from within the industry for increased protections for whistleblowers, saying that they fear for their lives and for the retribution they will receive for speaking out against a union with a lot of political and professional clout. There is nothing in this temporary bill that describes how the administration process will provide protections for these whistleblowers who have, quite literally in some cases, risked their lives to speak out against this behaviour. Some stakeholders have suggested that officials who are found to have been engaged in bad behaviour should be held to account and have their status as a union official removed. That would be a far more effective deterrent than simply deregistering the CFMEU, which is the whole basis of this proposed legislation. It does nothing to allay the concerns of whistleblowers who have alleged criminal misconduct and the misappropriation of funds by members of the CFMEU, nor does it address the serious issues of donations to the Labor Party by this union. Labor wants to rush this bill through yesterday, if they could, without any scrutiny. If the Senate is to pass this temporary bill, it needs to be amended. After first citing the bill on Monday of this week, by Tuesday afternoon, just 24 hours after receiving it, Senator Cash had received the contents and proposals within it, reviewed the contents and the proposals within it, and issued a media release outlining a number of comprehensive amendments required to deal with the many flaws contained in the proposed legislation. Despite circulating several government amendments that simply fix the basic flaws identified in the drafting of the legislation, the Minister, now 48 hours after receiving Senator Cash's proposed amendments, has still not agreed to the Coalition's amendments. In her release on Tuesday, media release on Tuesday, Senator Cash noted that the government's bill is so weak it could have been co-authored by the CFMEU. It conveniently provides the Minister with far too much power, including the ability to end administration early. For example, if Labor were re-elected, they could end the administration the day after the election. She also goes on to point out that, not surprisingly, the bill is silent on the Labor Party receiving political donations from the CFMEU, despite the clear conflict that is present. In reality, if Labor are serious about cleaning up the construction sector, they must bring back the ABCC, deregister the CFMEU and reintroduce the former Coalition Government's Ensuring Integrity Bill, which Labor blocked in 2019. The ABCC needs all the powers they had in the past and more so they can go after criminal activity in the industry. Penalties for breaches of the Fair Work Act need to be increased, and the fit and proper person tests for right of entry onto construction sites need to be tightened. People with multiple criminal offences should never be granted right of entry permits. In relation to this temporary bill before us, Senator Cash's media release outlines 20 key amendments that the Coalition have proposed. They are crucial to the integrity of this bill. And for clarity, I'll go through them. They are: the administration must apply to all branches of the CFMEU for a minimum of 3 years. The minister should not have the ability to end the administration early. The scheme of administration can only be varied by the Federal Court on the application of the administrator. That the legislation must clearly set out what must be in the scheme of administration. This should not be determined solely at the whim of the minister. That political donations, political campaigns and advertising by the CFMEU should be explicitly banned during the period of administration. For the purposes of transparency, the administrator must provide a written report to Parliament every 3 months from the commencement of the administration about its activities and progress and appear at Senate estimates. That the administrator is given the ability to impose longer expulsion or disqualification periods for officers, as opposed to the up to 5 years as outlined in the legislation. That a new fit and proper person test be introduced for all CFMEU delegates and officers. That the administrator must appoint a special purpose auditor to examine the financial dealings of the CFMEU prior to the commencement of administration, with the cost of special purpose auditor paid for by the CFMEU, not by the taxpayer. That the special purpose auditor's first report needs to be tabled by the final sitting day of 2024. The retrospective date be changed from the 17th of July 2024 to a date prior to the resignation of Mr John Setka. The administrator should be given additional powers to investigate dealings between the CFMEU and other parties, including other registered organisations and/or political parties. That the administrator, in undertaking their duties, should be able to investigate past practices of the CFMEU relating to unlawful conduct. The administrator should be given the power to review and amend the CFMEU rules. The inclusion of an objects clause which outlines what the administrator needs to achieve before administration can cease. And the administrator is given the power to apply for the deregistration of the CFMEU if appropriate. The administrator must be able to compel officers, employees and delegates of the CFMEU not to associate with an organised crime group or outlawed motorcycle gang. The administrator to have the ability to renegotiate EBAs. To ensure that the administrator is required to exercise that functions with specific regard to the objects of the Registered Organisation Act, with a focus on reducing the adverse effects of industrial disputation, ensuring the CFMEU, its officers, employees and delegates act in accordance with the law, and promotes a productive and harmonious construction industry. And finally, to strengthen the powers of the administrator to compel compliance with the scheme of administration. Deputy President, this temporary bill does not go far enough in providing any incentives to stamp out this behaviour from the CFMEU. It does nothing to hold those accused of criminal misconduct to account, and will be cold comfort to the families whose loved ones have endured this abuse for years at the hands of a union that has become more of a militant activist than a workers' union. I thank the Senate.